first thing you notice is the quality of the light. It has not yet acquired the golden weight of morning, nor the harsh clarity of noon. Instead, it is a pale, watery gray, filtered through the many levels of lattices and stone overhangs that guard your narrow streetway. You do not need to look closely to know what time it is. You can feel the gradual shifting pressure in the air itself. The city has not yet woken up fully, held suspended in a deep layer of quietude, muffling the sounds that usually define Constantinople when the day advances. A profound stillness settles over the clustered buildings, an almost tangible blanket woven from sleep and cool stone. You begin by letting your movements unfold with deliberate slowness. There is no hurry to greet the demanding pace of commerce or the demands of imperial life. This early hour belongs only to the rising energy within you and the slow pulse of the deep city. You move toward the basin, the water itself appearing cool and faintly mineral scented against the grit of the stone floor. The washing of your hands is a ritualistic act, not merely preparatory. As the stream cools the skin beneath your fingertips, you notice the chill, a sharp whisper that speaks to the coolness retained in the heavy masonry of the dwelling. This chill penetrates the thin layers of fabric and lingers on your pulse points. After washing, you pause and simply observe the space around you. The scent is complex, damp mortar mingling with stale night air, overlaid by faint, dry notes, perhaps yesterday's charcoal smoke or the lingering aroma of olive oil lamps. These smells are the biography of a working city sleeping within its own skin. You gather your simple woven wrap, feeling the familiar texture of the undyed wool against your palms. Every item in this small domestic space is used, worn, and loved into soft patinas. Stepping out further, away from the immediate confines of your door, you begin to listen. The sounds are sparse, precious offerings that puncture the silence. You detect a faint, sporadic rattling sound, distant enough that it might be the wind catching loose metal, or perhaps the wheel of an early cart being coaxed over uneven paving stones by some porter far across the district. It is not part of the city's main chorus. It is an isolated note struck at great intervals. You pay attention to the sounds above ground level. High up, among the roof lines and window boxes, you hear the sudden, sharp flutter of wings. A pigeon takes flight, or perhaps a smaller bird testing its nascent wing muscles against the cool morning current. Their calls are brief, surprisingly robust echoes that seem too cheerful for the pre-dawn gloom, reminding you that even in repose, life insists on moving and breathing. The rhythmic nature of these early sounds, the distant rattle, the flutter, the settling weight of the city, begins to synchronize with your own breath. This quiet moment is a valuable commodity, more rare than any expensive dye or fine silk thread. It is here that the true rhythm of work begins, not with labor itself, but with preparation for it. You start to gather yourself and and begin the necessary steps toward your specialized workshop. The walk through the narrow passage feels deliberate. You are moving through a corridor of history, past merchant stalls still shuttered tight, their wooden faces painted against the gloom. The heavy scent of stacked raw materials, coarse wools, bales of undyed linen, simple jute, is almost overwhelming in its straightforward reality. As you approach the designated entrance to your specialized textile area, the atmosphere subtly changes. Here, within this section of the workshop space, the accumulated presence of pigment and fine thread gives off a faint, unique mineral tang, distinct from the general smells of commerce. You pass other artisans who are also preparing for the day, moving with similar muted energy. They greet you not with fanfare or conversation, but with slight nods, acknowledgments of shared purpose and rhythm. You draw the heavy wooden bolt across the entrance to your specialized area. The sound is a solid, muffled thunk, signaling your passage into your workspace. Inside, though it is still early, there is already an undercurrent of organized quietude. Skeins of silk, your primary material, hang in neat rows, waiting for the day's processes. They are wrapped or spooled with meticulous care, possessing a cool, almost dry weight that feels impossibly delicate, yet immensely valuable. You move toward your preparation station. Your hands drift automatically to certain tools: small mortar and pestle, trays of dried roots and minerals, specialized cutting knives. You lay them out as if conducting an inventory of quiet expectation. The arrangement itself is a form of meditation, ordering the necessary chaos into manageable components. The task before you today is not weaving, but the careful reestablishment of resources. This means assessing the state of your pigments and preparing for the deep chemistry that awaits in the dye vats. You run your fingers across a small chunk of dried malachite, noting its dusty emerald coolness. It reminds you that all the vibrancy of your future creations, the imperial purple, the saintly gold, the earthly crimson, begins as something simple: stone, leaf, or root. The early hours demand this methodical approach. You know that rushing any part of this process will diminish the quality of the final piece. The subtle chemical interactions must happen under controlled, predictable conditions. This slow commencement is itself a lesson in patience, mirroring the endurance required of both your craft and the great city surrounding you. You take a deep breath, tasting the mingled air, the hint of dust from ground minerals mixing with the fainter, sharper promise of damp earth waiting to be activated. The day has only just begun its slow unfolding, measured by the increasing brightness at the threshold of your narrow window, promising a long cycle of careful labor and quiet contemplation. The chill of the early hour still clings to your garments, a fine mist that seems woven into the very stone of the workshop. You have left the quiet stillness of the morning, and now turn your attention inward toward the core materials, the colors themselves. Everything you do from this point forward hinges on transforming raw earth and simple leaves into stable, vibrant hues. You move past the main working area to a low corner where specialized vats sit like still pools of liquid color. Here, the order is meticulously maintained, reflecting not just organization, but necessity. Misplaced powder or mixed temperature could undo days of preparation. You note how the light catches on the damp flagstones here, illuminating specks of colored dust, the ghosts of pigments past. Your work begins with minerals. You retrieve small sacks containing ground earth, carefully sifted through different grades of ochre and malachite. These are not merely powders, they carry specific chemical histories. Handling them requires a gentle ritual. You draw out your mortar and pestle. The stone cool beneath your fingers. The initial grinding is a low, repetitive, physical act. You apply slow pressure, feeling the resistance of the hard minerals giving way into a fine, breathable dust. The scent rises immediately, a dry, dusty smell mixed with the faint, metallic tang of crushed rock. You spend time examining the colors closely. This particular ochre, comes from quarry sites just beyond the city walls. Its iron content gives it a warm depth that mimics sunset on the Golden Horn. You compare it silently to a sample already pressed dry. One shade is deeper, richer, suggesting a slightly different vein of stone was used in its extraction. This subtle difference means the final color on the silk will hold differently under the midday sun. Your senses are entirely focused on this comparison, cataloging minute variations. Next, you turn your attention to the plant world, the necessary complements to the stable minerals. You gather handfuls of roots and barks intended for mordants and other coloring agents. The madder root is paramount. Its crimson potential must be coaxed out through precise alchemy. It requires more than just simmering in water. It demands knowledge of how different tannins interact with protein fibers, like those found in silk. You carry the gathered materials back to a central preparation area. There are specialized ceramic vessels for each dye bath, one deep brown clay for indigo preparation, another off-white basin for rinsing pigments, and many smaller bowls for soaking mordants. The process of preparing the bath is surprisingly complex. You must manage both organic and inorganic components simultaneously. The madder root begins in a large iron kettle filled with water drawn from a specific spring known for its hardness. As it slowly heats, you watch the water gradually change color from clear and mundane to a pale, blushing pink. This shift is not immediate. It unfolds over time, demanding patience. You move on to indigo. Indigo requires meticulous handling. Because of its unique dye structure, it cannot simply be mixed with water. It must undergo reduction using agents like fermented plant matter. You gently ladle the powdered indigo leaf into the designated vat. The liquid changes from a murky blue-black to something almost velvety in consistency. When you add your reducing agent, a faint, yeasty smell combines with the strong aroma of wet earth and tannins. As you work through these preparations, the steady rhythm establishes itself, the scraping sound of ground pigments against the mortar, the soft slosh of water into the earthenware basins, the occasional careful stir with a wooden paddle. This predictable cadence becomes a kind of internal metronome, regulating your movements and thoughts. It is a deeply satisfying repetition. You pause, allowing yourself to absorb the current smells, the clean dampness of river-fed stone meeting the earthy sharpness of bruised roots, punctuated by the sharp, mineral tang of freshly crushed rock. These scents are not background noise. They are elements of your trade, as essential and defining as the silk itself. Eventually, you begin collecting the various preparations into separate containers. One for the mineral mordants, another containing the prepared plant extracts, and a third, largest vat reserved specifically for soaking the precious threads. The sheer volume of knowledge required to maintain these systems is immense. You are not just boiling leaves, you are managing chemical reactions based on empirical observation accumulated over centuries. You think about how much work goes into achieving this perfect foundation, the stable color that will endure against the humid air and the friction of weaving. It speaks to a profound respect for materials, both natural and artificial, in their careful refinement. Each stain, every powdered pigment, is a consequence of understanding time, temperature, and the specific interactions between earth and life. With all the tinctures prepared and resting, the hot vats cooling slightly, the powders stacked neatly, the initial alchemical stage draws to a close. The complex, almost magical preparation now awaits the final step. Accepting these vibrant potential colors into the delicate threads of silk themselves, it is a transition from chemistry to immersion. The wash basin water is already cool beneath your palms, a damp contrast to the gentle heat retained in the inner stones of the workshop. You feel the residual chill from the outer city air settling into your bones as you move away from the basin and toward the dye area. The day's preparations have placed the finest threads on the edges of exhaustion. Yet, there is still a quiet discipline guiding your movements. You need to work with the skeins now, transforming the delicate natural fibers from their bleached white state into colors that will sing against the eventual richness of gold thread and deep Tyrian purple. Your attention falls first upon the vats. The liquids are waiting, various hues of earth tones, vegetal stains, and carefully reduced alkaline baths. You know that working with silk is not like dyeing wool. The fiber takes color differently, demanding both gentleness and a precise chemical understanding. To dye incorrectly is to waste time, materials, and valuable resources. You begin by selecting the appropriate threads, the warp strands. These are the foundation of your pattern, the vertical stability that holds the entire design up. They must be meticulously prepared before they meet the color bath. You gently unwind a manageable length, noticing how the surface of the silk catches the faint light filtering through the high window slits. The material is resilient, yet fragile. It feels cool and almost aqueous in your hands. Next comes the soaking process, which must be approached with utmost care. You dip the skeins into the first vat, perhaps a gentle stain derived from crushed madder root or cochineal insects, depending on the specific tone required for the pattern. The liquid is not merely water. It is an active mixture of tannins and minerals, seasoned to accept and hold pigment. As you lower the silk into the bath, you watch the interaction up close. There is a slight movement, a subtle blush appearing almost immediately where the fabric meets the dye solution. The scent rises slowly, a humid blend of wet earth, sweet plant matter, and the faint metallic tang inherent in the salts used to fix the color. This fragrance signals not just preparation, but transformation. It grounds you deeply in the present moment, forcing your mind to shed the rush of the market day or the contemplation of distant imperial courts. Here there is only silk, dye, and time. You do not soak them all at once. Instead, you handle small bundles, feeling the weight and slight resistance of the damp threads. You dip one end, hold it just beneath the surface for a counted breath, and then withdraw it slowly. Observe how the color doesn't just sit on the surface. It seems to penetrate deep into the structure of the fiber itself, staining the core from within. This section of work demands constant sensory feedback. You are monitoring temperature. A deviation of even a few degrees could destabilize the chemical bonding process, resulting in a muted or uneven stain. Your fingers instinctively register the warmth through the water, ensuring it remains consistently at the ideal level for deep penetration. A cool spot means less absorption. A too hot area risks shocking and damaging the delicate protein structure of the silk. You move methodically from thread to thread, each dip a small ritual. You lift the colored bundle out, supporting its weight with both hands. Instead of letting it dry quickly, which would fix the color unevenly in some areas, you gently spread it over a hanging frame crafted of reeds and wood. The wet silk hangs there, radiating moisture into the air, slowly giving off the scent of fresh stain. The consistency of the resulting color is paramount. You mentally catalog the outcome. Does the madder root provide the necessary rich warmth? Is the indigo achieving its promised depth of blue-black? Each successful immersion is a small confirmation of your knowledge, a testament to generations of accrued, specialized skill that exists outside the grand chronicles of empire. Hours pass in this measured pace. The initial energy required for the dyeing process settles into a sustained, deep concentration. You find yourself observing details beyond the immediate task. You note how dust motes dance in the shafts of sunlight, penetrating the grimy high windows, and how they catch the moisture rising from the dye vats. The geometry of the light falling across your workstation suggests patterns even before the loom does. The very nature of silk dictates this rhythmic approach. It cannot be rushed. You allow pockets of reflection to arise between the batches of threads. Here, you think about the source of the materials, the farmer who grew the cochineal, the distant mineral deposit mined by workers far away, the hands that spun the thread originally. Every component connects back to a human effort, however small or geographically removed. When working with multiple shades, the comparison becomes almost an act of visual poetry. You compare the current batch dyed in saffron, derived perhaps from costly turmeric, against older threads stained by the sea minerals you used previously. The difference in hue, even subtle variations, speaks volumes about changes in local harvests or shifts in trade routes that altered your pigment sources. This accumulated knowledge is more valuable than any coin. The work continues until a selection of warp strands reaches the desired depth and vibrancy, perfectly set to receive their final patterns on the loom. You bundle them carefully, ensuring they are supported by the drying racks, letting gravity assist in setting the stain before you turn your focus to the main structure of your craft, the looming pattern itself. The dyed threads, now dried enough to handle without staining everything beneath them, rest like coiled potential energy, ready for the moment when controlled tension will give them life and form. You move from the dye vats and washing stations, leaving the scent of wet roots and mineral dust behind you. A deeper quiet settles over the workshop as your attention turns solely to the raw structure of your trade. Your gaze is drawn inevitably toward the loom, a heavy piece of wood that seems to anchor the entire room. It has stood here for generations, witness to countless patterns set by hands like yours. You approach it slowly, feeling the familiar weight and presence of the machine. You do not yet begin weaving. Rather, you are engaged in its preparation, a ritualistic act of counting and measuring that precedes all art. Your fingers trace the thick wooden beams and the meticulously carved guides guiding every thread. The air here feels different, cleaner, denser, carrying only the fine dust of dried dyes and the slight metallic tang of stressed silk. To begin any pattern of true Byzantine complexity, you must first establish an unshakable foundation, the warp. This is not merely setting up threads. It is creating a precisely measured tapestry of potential energy, a ghost fabric upon which all beauty will eventually rest. You kneel before the loom, and the sheer scale of the task brings a meditative focus to your movements. The silk skeins are unwound in long, fragile lengths. They arrive here from other parts of the city, often dyed, but still needing their final alignment upon this very frame. As you begin feeding them into the warp beam, you must be acutely mindful of tension. Each single thread, though seemingly insignificant, carries tremendous importance. It is a structural column supporting an image that cannot yet exist. Your fingers work with surprising gentleness, separating and aligning each strand. You are counting not just numbers, but potential interactions. How the light will catch on the dyed surface later, how the pressure of the shuttle will pass over it, and how resistant it is to stretching under load. The threads must be straight as a soldier's plume, taut yet never so tight that they risk snapping or distorting their subtle color. They must possess an engineered flexibility. You feel the slight give in the silk as you pull it evenly across the frame. It passes through your fingertips with cool smoothness, occasionally catching on grit or a minute speck of dye residue. You pause at these points, observing the way the light catches the sheer surface, revealing countless microscopic fibers, each responsible for carrying this immense architectural stress. It is amazing how much potential tension resides in so many seemingly effortless strands. Layer upon layer of colored silk accumulates across the loom's mechanism. You measure them with precise wooden gauges and calipers that have become extensions of your own hands. The systematic nature of the count becomes almost soothing, a physical manifestation of order against the inherent randomness of life outside the workshop walls. Every thread must meet its neighbor at an exact distance, too closely packed, and it will foul too far apart, and the pattern will lack integrity. This is where deep knowledge meets careful craft. You recall the specialized patterns required, a miniature cross from a bishop's vestment, perhaps, or the repeating geometric borders of an imperial curtain. Each motif has a precise mathematical requirement for its warp threads, often dictated by ancient rules derived from Roman times, adapted and refined across centuries in this city that sits at the junction of worlds. The act requires sustained physical focus. You lift sections of the beam, guiding them over fixed wooden pegs, which hold the tension steady. The slight squeak of the oiled wood against the stressed silk, or the faint rasp as you adjust a peg, these are the only sounds allowed to interrupt the measured rhythm. You breathe shallowly and steadily, matching your breathing pace to the slow, methodical movements of threading. The sheer weight of this setup cannot be overstated. It is not just silk, it is structure. A failure in the warp preparation means that the final product will sag, tear, or fail to achieve the designed dimension. You spend what feels like an endless stretch of time ensuring absolute uniformity across hundreds of individual vertical lines. As you work further along the loom, your mind drifts from the physical count to a quiet philosophical appreciation of pattern itself. Life, much like the warp threads, is composed of countless intersecting rules and random occurrences that must be forced into an organized whole for anything beautiful to emerge. The tension required here mirrors the balance needed in life the necessity of structure alongside adaptability. You notice small details along the wooden frame, faint rings where hands have rested over decades, minuscule chips of paint lost from forgotten tools. These marks are not flaws, but historical notations etched into the wood by your forebears and their masters. They tell a story of constant renewal built upon unwavering tradition. The silk, having absorbed its color so painstakingly in previous stages, now seems to glow slightly under the early morning sun that has begun to angle through the narrow windows. The hues, the deep malachite green meant for vestments, the pale saffron yellow reserved for celebration, are muted but perfectly stable. They wait patiently within the rigid straight lines you are creating. You make a final adjustment to the primary tensioning mechanism. With one careful pull on a main cord, you set the foundational parameters. The structure is now poised, immensely taut, humming with potential energy. You lean back slightly, allowing your shoulders and neck muscles held in constant service during the hours of threading to release their accumulated strain. A deep sigh escapes you, not of weariness, but of profound completion regarding this stage of work. The immaculate vertical curtain of threads is complete. It stands ready for the next great ritual, the actual weaving. But for now, there is only the hushed beauty of the prepared foundation, a silent testament to human precision and the enduring power of careful measurement. The cool, stretched silk lies beneath your fingertips. It is the culmination of so many hours, the slow grind of minerals in Chapter 2, the steamy immersion in the dyed baths, and the careful count of every single prepared thread. Now, you sit before the loom, the intricate architecture waiting for life to breathe back into its structured frame. The morning light, having warmed slightly since dawn, now catches dust motes dancing near the exposed wooden parts of the machine. You adjust your sitting posture, feeling the familiar ache settling in your lower back and shoulders, the steady memory of a body dedicated to meticulous repetition. There is a slight metallic tang in the air, mixing with the deeper, sweet smell of wet silk and setting pigments. The first movement must be deliberate. Your hands, already stiff from the morning's preparatory actions, move toward the shuttle box. You lift your arm, noticing the subtle weight of the instrument. It feels balanced, shaped perfectly for its task. Before you work, you pause to observe the pattern laid out in the warp threads. Hundreds of individual strands, each dyed a specific shade, run tautly from the back beam to the front roller. Each single thread represents a choice, whether it must catch the light with the cool gleam of blue or hold the deep warmth of red. You trace an imaginary line over these prepared colors, recognizing that this complex structure is your canvas and your discipline. You grasp the beater bar, feeling the worn smoothness of the ancient wood in your palm. This tool will dictate the final texture. Its weight and arc are critical to forming the weft smoothly across the warp. You breathe out slowly, emptying your lungs completely before allowing the first rhythmic cycle to begin. The mind prepares for a profound immersion into pattern where thought must mirror the steady beat of the machine itself. The initial rhythm is always tentative, almost a conversation between man and fiber. You lift the shuttle, feeling its wooden body humming slightly with potential energy. With careful focus, you guide it across the gap between the taut vertical threads. The sound that follows is a soft, reassuring whisper, a gentle whoosh as the shuttle passes through the shed. It does not snap, but rather glides, suggesting continuity and grace. Then comes the beat of the reed. You raise the beater bar, drawing your arm back in a controlled arc, and push it forward with steady force. The soft impact of the reeds against the newly woven horizontal thread is slightly muffled, yet fundamentally solid. This thwack is the heartbeat of your trade, establishing the basic density and structure that will support all future design. The small rectangle of color you have just created seems impossibly delicate, a thin sliver of pure textile life emerging from the structured vacuum of the loom. You lean closer, bringing your face near the fresh weave, noticing how the adjacent colors interlock. The way the deep crimson threads rest against the pale blue ground, creating a visual tension that suggests permanence. You continue this cyclical motion. Shuttle across, shed lift, beat bar strike. The process is deeply physical, yet mentally demanding. You count not merely the rows of weft being added, but the mathematical certainty required to maintain perfect horizontal alignment, while simultaneously executing complex geometric patterns. Your fingers memorize the feel of the treadles beneath your feet, coordinating the release and tension that must happen instantaneously with the flight of the shuttle. The rhythm begins to establish a meditative quality. Soon, the careful, conscious effort fades into an almost automatic flow, like breathing itself. The initial resistance in your joints gives way to a smooth kind of fatigue, the good kind, that comes only after sustained focus on a single, repetitive, beautiful task. You begin to notice things beyond the immediate mechanics. Your eyes wander over the side beams of the loom, noticing the intricate joinery and the way time has polished the wood grain into deep rivers of color. The scent of the dye dust, previously noticeable in sharp bursts, now blends softly with the dry smell of the linen used for wiping, creating a unique work-stained aroma that is utterly specific to this place. This smell, you realize, is the smell of livelihood, the accumulated history of careful hands working over centuries. The patterns you are weaving, perhaps depicting stylized vines or interlocking knotwork, common in ecclesiastical garments, demand an eye for symmetry and repetition. You find yourself anticipating not just the next weave, but the pattern 3 rows from now, maintaining a mental blueprint that coordinates your physical actions. It is less about generating new ideas than it is about perfecting the execution of established ones. The soundscape narrows to these few elements: the controlled squeak of the loom mechanisms adjusting tension, the whisper whoosh of the shuttle passing, and the rhythmic, slightly damp thwack of the beater bar. These sounds become anchors in your day, a constant auditory measure against which the slow passage of time is marked. You adjust the tension on a corner section, feeling a slight pull when you do so. The silk resists slightly, requiring just the right amount of countertension to remain perfectly taut without snapping back violently. It is this careful balance of resistance and yield that defines not only your textiles, but perhaps also the relationship between craftspeople and their materials. The small stack of finished threads waiting for incorporation seems suddenly daunting in its sheer number, each one a potential element of complex beauty. You mentally catalog the shades, from the pale yellow that catches the sunlight to the deep violet reserved for ritual wear, a palette requiring both expert knowledge and immense patience. The color choices are never arbitrary. They must harmonize with the symbolism inherent in the garment's eventual use. The intensity of concentration allows your peripheral thoughts a quiet moment to surface. You wonder briefly about the people who will eventually wear this fabric, the solemnity of a bishop's vestments, or perhaps the subtle power displayed by a merchant using it for trade robes. Their lives are governed by their routines and status, much like your own rhythm is governed by the loom. Both require impeccable structure to function gracefully. The afternoon light begins to slant through the open entrance, casting long, dusty parallelograms across the workshop floor. The intensity of the direct sun briefly interrupts the internalized world of structured color. You pause for breath and watch how the light illuminates the sheer tension of the finished weave. It seems almost luminous, catching the dyes like captured memory. This moment allows your mind to drift away from the thread count for just a few seconds, resting in the quiet appreciation of what you have built with your hands. Maintaining the flow requires re-engaging this steady meditative state. You settle back into the familiar choreography, allowing the rhythm to wash over any lingering distraction. The loom accepts you fully again. You are not fighting the process. You are participating in its ancient, predictable beauty. Each passing moment is measured by the careful passage of that shuttle and the solid impact of the reed, continuing until the textile grows slowly out from the disciplined geometry of your labor. The patterned silk, rich with the deep stains of indigo and madder root, lies taut upon the loom, a whisper of complex geometry waiting for the day's air. You feel the dust settling lightly on your forearms, fine particles carrying faint memories of crushed roots and mineral earth. The rhythm of the weaving has slowed, naturally drawing you toward the edge of the workshop, where the heavy wooden door meets the passing clamor of Constantinople life. You pause, placing a careful hand near the worn latch. There is no sudden change in sound, merely a subtle accumulation of external noise, the scraping of sandals on flagstone, the distant braying of an animal, the modulated chant carried by some passerby. The workshop itself has become a sanctuary built from repetitive motion and controlled materials. Stepping slightly aside, you observe the arrangement of your trade goods. Spools of dyed thread hang like captured twilight. Certain sections stained the deep purple of expensive Tyrian dye, others bearing the softer, burnt orange of natural ochre. The light filtering through the upper window lattice has shifted from the direct illumination needed for working to a more oblique, diffused wash, signaling the time when commerce gently stirs. This slow shift in light requires you to adjust your vision, making the rich colors seem momentarily deeper, almost liquid. You do not expect dramatic encounters, only the quiet continuity that keeps this specialized skill alive. A gentle push on the door reveals the passage immediately outside, leading into a slightly busier thoroughfare. The temperature gradient is noticeable. The interior air holds the cool, mineral scent of dye baths and damp earth, while the street air carries a complex blend, the sharp aroma of baking bread mingling with the faint, metallic tang of sewage runoff and sun-warmed spices. You allow your breath to sync with this subtle shift in atmosphere, grounding yourself in the immediate sensory reality. It is at this threshold that you observe the initial grouping of people who pause near your stall. They are not rushing. They move with the measured pace characteristic of those engaged in careful transaction. Among them, there is a man whose robes suggest connection to the church, and another individual draped in finer fabrics, perhaps a merchant overseeing goods for an important household. Their presence requires nothing more than your stillness and a subtle acknowledgement of their passage. You gather yourself, allowing the natural rhythm of anticipation to settle into your posture. The exchange begins quietly, marked by gestures before words. The man in ecclesiastical robes points not at you, but toward a length of partially woven cloth that displays complex interlocking patterns, a section demanding specific dye fastness and warp integrity. His gaze is one of professional assessment. He seeks certainty, not mere beauty. You understand this look immediately. It requires the full knowledge of your craft to interpret. You draw nearer to the display piece, your movements economical and slow, as if careful not to disturb the delicate tension within the weave itself, running a finger lightly over the woven pattern. A repeat of stylized grapevines set against an intricate grid. You feel the precise, slightly raised texture of the overlapping threads. This touch is professional. It is tactile evidence of structural quality. The silk resists your casual handling, maintaining its perfect tension, which speaks volumes about both the initial preparation and the continuing care. The merchant, accompanying the cleric, watches closely. His attention lingers not only on the central pattern, but also on the exposed edges of the weave, where the warp ends are slightly visible. He seems to be assessing things you rarely need to mention. The way the color transitions from one vat to another without abrupt demarcation. The tightness with which the shuttle has been passed, suggesting a consistent tension applied over time. The conversation is not loud or urgent. It unfolds in measured tones, punctuated by meaningful pauses, where all three of you simply observe the fabric together. The cleric speaks primarily of color stability and symbolic meaning. The deep blue must withstand repeated washing near the holy sites. The yellow pigment must hold its bright chroma despite contact with oils used in liturgical lamps. These are questions rooted deeply in function and tradition, not merely aesthetics. The merchant interjects occasionally, subtly guiding the discussion toward cost and scale. He asks about your capacity to maintain this quality across larger quantities of material, requiring a measured response that reassures him of both your skill and your reliable output. This is where your years of practical knowledge become visible, the quiet assurance that you can meet the demands of Byzantine life without compromising integrity. You mentally catalog their observations against your own process. The cleric notes the subtle resilience in the green pigment, knowing it was derived from carefully aged copper deposits. The merchant asks about sourcing the dye-resist potential for even larger orders. Each question acts like a small lever, requiring you to recall specific stages of labor, the precise mineral grind needed, or the time allotted for cooling baths. As the exchange settles into its natural rhythm, the flow feels less like selling and more like verifying an enduring contract between art and necessity. You explain not only what the fabric is made of, but how it has been treated, the slow soaking in tannins, the controlled heating to set the stain permanently, the constant monitoring that distinguishes your work from hurried craft. You emphasize that the quality lies as much in the patience and knowledge passed down through generations as it does in the raw material itself. The tension is not about money. Though commerce is involved, it is about trust. They need this pattern to convey status, piety, or respectability, and they are trusting your meticulous labor to uphold that social meaning. This realization anchors you deeper into the moment, connecting the cool feel of the silk in your hands to the weight of tradition. The transaction reaches its close with a quiet acknowledgement of mutual understanding. There is no grand flourish, only the slight lowering of the voices and a gentle nod. The man in robes gives a final look at the weave, an expression suggesting deep satisfaction mingled with relief that such mastery was found locally. The merchant finally nods, signaling that the preliminary assessment is complete. As they begin to move away, drifting back into the tapestry of Constantinople life, you remain standing by your loom. The immediate intensity fades, replaced by a quiet sense of having successfully upheld the standards of your craft. You look at the rich pile of finished and partially finished pieces, noticing how the ambient light catches on the slight sheen of the silk fibers, the way they seem to absorb and refract the pale afternoon sun into faint rainbows. Your thoughts drift back, not to the transaction itself, but to the underlying constancy of your labor. The cyclical nature of creation, from the muddy earth pigments in Chapter 2 through the structured tension of the loom in Chapter 4, all culminates here in this quiet moment of exchange, proving that true artistry is defined by its predictable quality. You feel a gentle physical fatigue setting into your shoulders and hands, the deep satisfaction found after sustained, careful effort. The clamor of the street does not seem so overwhelming now. It has become merely background texture, like the distant strumming of an unseen lyre. You turn back toward the relative calm of your workshop, allowing the door to swing gently shut behind you, sealing out the full noise, and leaving only the quiet rhythm of the waiting threads for a moment's deep rest. The afternoon light, having softened from the harshness of the morning sun, now filters into the workshop through the oiled linen screens. It is a warmer, more humid glow than the dawn light, catching motes of fine dye dust suspended in the air. You continue your steady work at the loom, maintaining the slow, predictable rhythm established hours ago by the passing shuttle and the gentle push of the beater bar. The pattern you are establishing remains complex, demanding meticulous tension from every single thread. Yet, as your focus remains on the continuing weave, a small irregularity catches your peripheral eye. You notice it not through sound or sudden movement, but simply because it is wrong. Near the edge of the fabric, already woven, a section intended to hold the precise geometric interlace favored by the chapel's vestments, one of the warp threads has slipped. It does not snap dramatically, but rather twists away from its proper path, having succumbed slightly to an uneven pull, or perhaps a minute vibration within the wooden frame. The deviation is barely perceptible at first glance, yet if left uncorrected, it will introduce a ripple into the intricate structure that defines this fabric's value and stability. You slow your hands almost imperceptibly. The rhythmic momentum of weaving falters for a moment, replaced by the sudden quiet consideration demanded by tiny imperfection. You lean in slightly, bringing your vision close to the taut silk surface. The cool, damp texture of the weave registers under your fingertips, even through the accumulated dust and dye residue. Examining the snarl, you realize that merely pulling it back will not suffice. The thread must be re-anchored perfectly to its pegging point along the warp beam. It requires patience beyond mere mechanical action. This leads you inward, away from the immediate rhythm of the weaving process into a deep pool of specialized memory. You remember the subtle nuances of handling silk at this specific tension level. How much pressure is too much? Where does the inherent strength of the dyed fiber lie? These moments are always about knowledge, the accumulated wisdom that cannot be taught in a rush. You reach for your slender trimming knife, not to cut, but more as a tool of intense focus. You gently manipulate the adjacent threads, easing the tension on the flawed strand bit by bit. It feels almost like coaxing something reluctant back into harmony. The air here seems thick with the sense of aged wood, stabilizing minerals from the previous day's dyes, and the fainter, metallic sweetness of slightly cooling dye vats. As you work through this small repair, your mind drifts toward the necessary materials for such maintenance, the unique interplay between fiber and chemistry. You recall how a slight change in the mordant used during the initial dyeing process can make a thread more susceptible to tension damage. The deeper the stain was set, using the correct blend of tannins and alum salts, the greater its ability to resist physical strain. This simple repair becomes a vivid lesson on chemical endurance. Completing the re-anchoring, a careful knot tied beneath the visible surface, undetectable by touch or eye. You breathe out slowly. The momentary disruption has passed, and the structure is sound once more. A deep sense of professional quietude descends upon you. It is in these small moments of problem solving that the true depth of your knowledge resides. You move along the loom slightly, taking up the tension just before the repaired area to ensure the corrected section integrates seamlessly with the neighboring weave. The physical act of continuing the weaving becomes a confirmation of your success. The pattern flows onward, undisturbed by the earlier interruption. You find yourself noticing how the light shifts across the woven surface, a delicate interplay between the inherent sheen of the silk and the way the midday sun angle catches the slightly raised ridges of the complex weave structure. A momentary lapse in focus brings a quiet awareness of your environment. The workshop, contained by its stone walls within the clamor of Constantinople, remains an insulated world. You can hear the distant sounds, the clatter that suggests lives continuing just outside, perhaps a cart wheel rolling over uneven paving stones, or the high calls of street vendors mixing with the muted braying of a beast of burden far away. These background rhythms underline your quiet dedication to precision. This small repair is more than mere fixing. It is an affirmation of tradition. You are not merely operating machinery. Even though the loom feels like one, you are performing a ritualized act of continuity, transmitting centuries of highly specific technical knowledge from your hands into this delicate threadwork. The silk itself seems almost alive under your steady care, its structure holding both mathematical precision and organic beauty. You allow yourself to observe the quality of the weave again, particularly where it meets the repaired segment. You ensure that the density of the interlocking threads is absolutely uniform, This meticulous attention to detail isn't only about passing inspection. It speaks to a profound respect for the patron who commissioned the work, whether they be a wealthy merchant or an official serving the great church bells. As you weave further, perhaps another minor issue arises, a tiny thread catching too sharply on the reed before being smoothed out. You address this with a similar detached concentration. Each problem is resolved not through adrenaline, but through recall, a sudden flash of instructional memory. Always check the tension from the back. The dampness affects the outer warp. These recollections solidify your expertise, anchoring you more firmly in the reality of the workshop. The slow passage of time continues to guide your hands. The air grows increasingly thick with the humid scent characteristic of a great city settled into its mid-afternoon cycle, a mix of warm stone, lingering smoke from hearths, and the specific vegetal aroma of dye materials left soaking in water. You notice how the slight increase in humidity affects the silk fibers themselves. They lose some of their initial crisp tautness, becoming softer, yielding slightly to tension. This gentle surrender in the material forces you to adjust your own rhythm, allowing the movement to become less forceful and more graceful. A fluid continuation of skilled labor. It is an understanding that technical mastery is also about adaptability, the ability to read the materials and the environment before applying force. The quiet problems encountered today have deepened not just your physical skill, but your intuitive connection to the matter you handle. The afternoon stretches out in this cycle of minor correction and measured continuation. Your focus remains a gentle, unwavering point on the repeating pattern, absorbing the meditative quality of solving these small puzzles until the need for repair fades into the background, leaving only the satisfying hum of steady creation. The constant, subtle energy of the weaving process finally demands a momentary pause. The shuttles rest near the edge of the loom, and the rhythmic clack has receded into a gentle silence. You feel the familiar pull of fatigue in your shoulders, a deep ache that comes from hours spent maintaining perfect tension against the resistance of the silk threads. A natural break settles over the workshop like a cooling mist. Gingerly, you rise from your bench, pushing back the stool with a slight scraping sound on the stone floor. The late morning light filtering through the lattices has softened further, losing the sharp edge it held hours ago. It is time for sustenance. You move toward the small counter where basic provisions are kept. Your hands brush against earthenware jars and sacks of dry legumes. The scent here is different from the coppery tang of dye or the sharpness of raw silk. It is a mixture of stored grains, dried herbs, and warmed stone, the smell of quiet endurance. You prepare a simple meal, coarse bread, which you break by hand, and perhaps some leftover roots stewed with olive oil. The ritual itself is calming. You find yourself seated at a low wooden table near the back wall, in a corner where the noise of passing life still seems a little distant. Your fellow weavers and artisans are also settling down. There is no grand gathering or celebratory feast, simply the quiet economy of shared necessity. You eat slowly, making sure to chew each bite thoroughly, noting the satisfying weight and rough texture of the bread against your palate. The warmth from the simple stew spreads through you, a gentle counterpoint to the cool stone floor beneath your feet. As you consume the meal, your focus shifts outward, yet remains deeply internal. You observe the subtle ways in which the light moves across the room. Dust motes dance, illuminated by stray shafts of sunlight that pierce the gaps between the roof tiles and the walls. They hang suspended for a fraction of a second before drifting down, each tiny speck bearing witness to the slow passage of time in the heart of Constantinople. You notice how others are eating too. The quiet rhythm of their own consumption mirrors your own. The soft scrape of bread on wood, the occasional gentle sigh as they lean back, momentarily at ease. The conversation is not one of great deeds or grand ideas. It follows the meandering paths common to people whose lives are rooted in repetition and meticulous detail. Some speak of the grain price near the Trajan's column gates. Others quietly discuss which local roots will give the most stable ochre this coming month. These details, small as they are, tether your existence firmly to the earth beneath you and the bustling commerce that defines your city. You pick up a piece of straw-stuffed bread end, turning it over in your fingers before eating it. The rough texture contrasts sharply with the slick smoothness of the dyed silks covering your looms nearby. This contrast settles into a deep sensory pool within you. You think about the enduring relationship between these materials, the temporary meal providing immediate energy, and the permanent skill requiring steady dedication to endure through seasons and generations. One artisan whose hands are stained permanently blue from indigo baths leans closer. He mentions how the current humidity, while necessary for dyeing, makes the stretched warp threads feel almost brittle in certain sections. You listen, not just with your ears, but by analyzing the concern etched into his face, a deep understanding of material failure that comes only from years spent living adjacent to silk and dye. You nod slowly, acknowledging the truth in his observation. This small exchange about tensile strength is more informative than any lesson learned from a scroll. You reflect on the cyclical nature of everything here. The dyes must be renewed, the threads must be soaked again. The energy consumed by the meal must fuel the continuation of the weave. Life, much like this great textile pattern emerging on your loom, is dependent upon constant cycles, taking color from the earth, passing tension through the air, and releasing structure into breathable cloth. When your stomach settles, you feel a quiet shift in energy. The weariness does not vanish entirely, but it transforms from a heavy ache into a manageable background hum. You pick up the small earthenware jug of cool water and drink deeply. It tastes mineral rich, carrying the faint echo of the cistern stone. Your mind feels cleared by the simplicity of the meal and the quiet observations shared with your peers. The momentary pause serves to refocus your awareness on the loom. The structured pattern remains waiting for you. The light continues its slow journey across the courtyard outside, moving from pale gold toward the deeper tones of afternoon shadow. It is a subtle shift in illumination that signals not just the passage of hours, but the increasing commitment required for the second half of the day's skilled labor. You wipe your hands carefully on a piece of discarded linen rag, steadying yourself physically and mentally. The simple act grounds you once more in the deep, meditative reality of being an artisan in this ancient city. The last thread is worked. You feel the steady weight of the beater bar, a familiar resistance that seems to have settled into your bones after hours of gentle force. You guide the shuttle one final time through the patterned shed, the soft, muffled thwack echoing in the semi-darkened workshop air. Your fingers, stained faintly with residual matter and indigo, pause on the reeds, momentarily detached from the structure you have just helped bring into existence. The beautiful length of fabric unrolls onto a low wooden table, its sheen catching the diminishing afternoon light, reflecting muted tones of violet and dusty blue that seem to absorb the very color from the surrounding air. You do not immediately stop working. You let your hands simply rest against the loom's sturdy frame, feeling the subtle vibrations of the wood and the tension within the massive structure. This pause is not laziness. It is necessary inventory. You observe the warp threads again, following their perfect vertical lines, realizing that the enduring beauty of this silk depends entirely on the initial perfection of those taut strands, set hours earlier in silent ritual. Each thread holds a memory of effort, the gentle crush of ochre pigment, the slow boil of madder root, the cold discipline of counting every single strand before setting up the loom. The light outside has deepened, shifting from bright afternoon gold to a cooler, more reflective gray. Through the lattice windows, you watch patches of the sky deepen into dusty mauves and muted blues, the signature colors of a Constantinople sunset, viewed through layers of dust and distant stone. The surrounding noises are beginning their transition toward evening quietude. You hear the faint clatter of wooden wheels from the street below, not the rushed energy of the morning market, but something more measured, weighted by the long day's completion. You carefully remove your hands from the loom, brushing the fine silk dust from your sleeves. The physical act feels like a shedding, leaving the focused intensity of the weaver's state behind. Closing the workshop door draws a noticeable hush over the interior. It is an audible sealing away of the day's industrious rhythm. You walk past the dye pots, still holding their residue, the faint, rich scent of fermented tannins and mineral earth clinging to the damp bricks and wooden surfaces. These materials, which held such vibrant color only hours ago, now seem settled, quieted by the passage of time and the cooling air. The journey back toward your dwelling is a slow immersion into the city's evening breath. The central thoroughfares are still busy with activity, but the sound texture has changed entirely. Gone is the sharp percussion of bargaining voices or the shouts of porters. Instead, you hear a deeper, more layered hum, the gentle murmur of conversation carried from open doorways, the rhythmic splash of water being drawn from a public fountain, the distant, melancholy cry of a street vendor calling out his evening wares in measured tones. The air itself is noticeably cooler now, carrying a mix of smells. There is the faint, sweet smoke of charcoal fires beginning to burn for the night's meals, blending with the damp, mineral scent rising from the nearby water channels and the subtle, comforting aroma of spices, cinnamon, or perhaps clove, wafting from a household kitchen window. These sensory details weave together a tapestry of lived existence. They speak not of empire or conquest, but simply of shelter and sustenance. You traverse familiar, narrow passages between buildings, where life is contained vertically and intimately. Here, the light does not arrive in grand sweeps. It filters down in cool, angled shafts that illuminate the rough texture of the stone walls and rest softly on the worn paving stones beneath your feet. Every step feels deliberate, measured against the backdrop of the slowing pulse of the city. You notice how the people you pass carry themselves differently now. Their movements are less rushed, their shoulders slightly slumped with the weariness earned from a full day of life within the great metropolis. When you finally reach the corner that leads toward your modest dwelling, the sense of profound quiet begins to settle over you. The density of sounds thins out until only the most consistent rhythms remain. The soft scrape of hooves on stone farther away, the occasional bark from a tethered dog, or the gentle drip of water into an unseen gutter. You take your time with the final moments before entering. You might pause near a small public basin, watching the evening sky darken quickly overhead, a palette moving through deep indigo to near black velvet. The accumulated knowledge of the day, the tensile strength required for perfect weave, the precise ratio needed in the indigo bath, the sheer geometry of a Byzantine pattern, all settles into a quiet repository within your mind. It is a profound understanding that connects physical craft with elemental chemistry, linking silk fibers to mineral earths and vegetal roots. The cool touch of the evening air against your skin feels grounding. You feel the weariness not as exhaustion, but as a deep satisfaction, the kind of ache in the fingers and back that comes from having spent focused time on something beautiful and necessary. Inside your home, the immediate atmosphere shifts again. The light is provided by oil lamps, casting warm, yellow pools against the coolness of the evening air. highlighting the rough plaster walls and the simple woven textures of domestic life. You move through your small space with a ritualistic slowness, depositing the remnants of your day's activity, a wash rag, a small wooden tool, in their accustomed places. The scents change again. The faint wood smoke from the cooking embers mixes with the dry smell of stored grain and cooled clay, creating a deeply domestic olfactory signature. The final act of the evening is one of quiet settling. You sit near an opening, watching the last remnants of natural light struggling against the deepening night. Your mind continues to cycle through patterns, the intricate interlocking geometry of the pattern you worked upon, which mirrors the structure of your own community and the enduring rhythms of Constantinople itself. There is a meditative rhythm inherent in human endeavor, the need for precise tension, whether it be in a thread on a loom or in the shared routines that allow life to persist amid such great stone walls and shifting tides of people. As you finally settle down, feeling the slow ebb of the city's day rhythm receding into the deep calm of night, you are wrapped not just in your blankets, but in the accumulated knowledge and quiet endurance of the artisan's life. The rhythm of sleep approaches softly, guided by the memory of taut silk